All right, let's dive in. This time, we're exploring the history of energy innovation, but with a twist, right?
Yeah. We're focusing on those individuals who kind of shook things up a bit, those who challenged the norms.
Exactly. And, looking at the research you've sent over, it seems like we've got some pretty incredible and sometimes even controversial stories to uncover.
Absolutely. And one thing that really jumps out from all this material is this constant push and pull between progress and control.
Interesting.
You have these amazing inventors pushing the boundaries of energy technology, but then on the other side, you have those who benefit from keeping things the way they are.
So like a power struggle of sorts.
Exactly. It's a theme that's played out for centuries, and we're going to look at some key moments and figures in this whole narrative.
I'm ready. Let's start with a classic, shall we? The rivalry between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison.
Ah, the War of Currents. A story everyone thinks they know, but these sources you've got, they dig a bit deeper.
Right. Especially into Tesla's ideas about wireless energy transmission. Pretty radical stuff, especially back then.
Oh, absolutely. Tesla truly believed in a world where energy could be, well, free and available to everyone, transmitted wirelessly across any distance. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. But you're right, the sources do point out that this idea kind of freaked out some pretty powerful people, like J.P. Morgan.
Yeah, Morgan had a ton invested in the copper industry. All the wiring needed for traditional electricity transmission.
So Tesla's vision was a direct threat to his business.
Big time. And ultimately, that's part of what led to the downfall of Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower project.
It's almost like a classic tale, right? The visionary inventor versus the established powers.
Definitely. But it's a pattern we see again and again, not just with Tesla. For instance, take Rudolf Diesel, the inventor of the diesel engine.
Oh yeah, but wait, wasn't there something about him wanting to use vegetable oils?
There is. And it's a detail that gets overlooked so often. Diesel was way ahead of his time. He saw the potential for alternative fuels way back then.
Wow, but then that would have also challenged the fossil fuel industry, wouldn't it?
For sure. And that's where this power struggle comes back in.
Then there's that whole mystery surrounding Diesel's death, right? The sources mention he drowned under some pretty suspicious circumstances.
Yeah, it's still debated today. But you have to wonder if more powerful forces were at play.
It does make you think.
Yeah.
And speaking of mysteries and potential suppression, we've got Stanley Meyer, the guy who claimed to have invented a car that ran on water.
Now that's a story that captures the imagination. His technology, at least from what I've read, seemed pretty straightforward.
Yeah, splitting water molecules to extract hydrogen for fuel. But he faced so much opposition.
And legal challenges, too, not to mention his sudden and unexplained death.
It's another case of an inventor whose work seemed to threaten the established order. It's almost a little scary,
It definitely raises some big questions about what happens when innovative ideas clash with powerful interests.
It does. And then there's Paul Pantone with his multi-fuel engine, aiming to reduce pollution, but he faced pushback too, right?
Big time. Allegations of suppression and even forced institutionalization. His story is in those sources too.
It seems like we're seeing a pattern here. These brilliant minds developing potentially revolutionary energy technologies only to be met with resistance, ridicule, even threats.
That's exactly it. It's like there's this unseen force trying to control how energy develops.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It is. What's really striking is how this pattern appears across different times and in different places. All these stories, taken together, they paint a picture, don't they?
Yeah, they do. It seems like alternative energy has often come up against some very powerful forces determined to protect their own interests.
Exactly. And that's something worth thinking about as we explore this topic further. It's really important, I think, to see all these individual stories, like Tesla and Diesel, in a wider context.
You mean historically?
Exactly. Like, think about the whole rise of the fossil fuel industry.
Right. The sources do talk about that quite a bit.
And how that industry became so dominant. It's a story that's kind of woven into all these other narratives, about suppressing alternative ideas.
Yeah, for sure. The sources mention the Industrial Revolution and how energy demand just exploded during that time.
Exactly. And coal was king at first, but then oil came along.
Right. More versatile, more energy dense.
Seemed like the perfect solution at the time. But looking back, you can see how that dependence on fossil fuels set the stage for a lot of the issues we're dealing with now.
It's all connected. And the sources also highlight some of the key players in that story, like John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil.
Rockefeller.
Brilliant, but, ruthless too.
Yeah, the sources really paint him as someone who is driven to control the oil industry.
He basically created a monopoly, right?
It seems like it. And that kind of concentration of power had a huge impact on the energy scene for decades. Oh, absolutely. It shaped policies, influenced decisions, the whole thing.
It shows how economics can really shape which technologies get developed and adopted.
For sure. And speaking of influential figures, you can't leave out Thomas Edison and General Electric.
It's interesting how Edison still managed to become such a big deal in electrification.
Yeah, even though he lost that war of currents with Tesla.
He was a smart businessman, no doubt. He recognized the importance of electricity and went after it.
General Electric, they became a giant, producing everything from light bulbs to those massive power generators.
It's like he showed that adaptability and knowing the market can be just as crucial as, the actual invention itself.
Absolutely. So yeah, Tesla's wireless energy dream didn't take off right away, but in a way, Edison still profited from the electrification of the world.
It's a weird twist, right?
It is, and it shows that the story of energy is just so complex. It's all these breakthroughs and economic interests and personal ambitions all mixed together.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the sources also point out that those factors don't always work out for the best, right?
Right, like the whole dominance of the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, we see the environmental consequences now, and the social ones too, even though it created wealth for some.
It's a reminder that progress doesn't always move in a straight line, and that even good intentions can have unintended consequences.
For sure. But the search for alternatives, it hasn't stopped, right?
Not at all. And actually, your sources take us on a really interesting detour to Latin America, a region that's been quite active in alternative energy research.
Oh, that's right. I remember reading about that. There were some fascinating examples.
Definitely. The sources talk about Arturo Solis, a scientist from Mexico who developed a battery, get this, based on melanin.
Melanin, like the stuff that gives our skin its color, that can generate electricity.
That's exactly it. Solis's research shows how we can use natural resources in really unexpected ways to create sustainable solutions.
A battery powered by melanin's reaction to light and water. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. It makes you wonder what other possibilities are out there, right?
Yeah, totally. And the sources also mention Norberto Keppe, I think from Brazil.
That's right. He had this whole theory about extracting energy from empty space, from the vacuum.
His Keppe motor, right.
Yeah.
I remember that. It seemed pretty out there.
It might sound strange, but it highlights how important it is to think outside the box.
I agree. You never know where the next breakthrough will come from.
Exactly. And then there's Jose Antonio Urbanea Castellan, an inventor from Mexico. He came up with these really innovative solar ovens.
I read about those. Designed for rural communities without easy access to electricity.
Yeah, it's a great example of how innovation can be driven by social needs.
Using the sun, something that's readily available, to address a real problem.
It shows that the search for alternative energy solutions, it's happening everywhere.
It's a global movement, for sure. But it makes me wonder, can these individual inventors really make a difference? Up against these huge, powerful forces.
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the sources don't really give us a clear answer.
But they do offer some interesting perspectives, like Mazar City in Abu Dhabi.
Ah, yes. A whole city designed around sustainability.
Powered entirely by renewable energy. It sounds amazing.
It suggests that large-scale renewable projects are possible.
But can something like that be replicated on a global scale?
It's definitely up for debate. But Masdar City shows what can happen when economic interests and environmental goals align.
That's true. The sources also talk about how consumer demand is changing things, and the role of government policies, too.
Absolutely. It's not just about these lone inventors fighting the good fight.
It's about a larger shift in society. Consumers demanding sustainable options, government supporting clean energy, investors seeing the potential.
Exactly. The sources suggest that we're at a tipping point.
The choices we make now will determine the future of energy.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It feels like this whole deep dive, we've been talking about this power struggle, right?
Yeah, it keeps coming up.
It's like energy has shaped global politics. It's driven conflicts. It's been going on for over a century.
It's true. And those sources you gave me, they really highlight how energy, especially oil, turned the Middle East into, well, a global energy powerhouse.
Yeah, and in the 20th century, that really changed everything.
It became this geopolitical battleground, with everyone wanting control.
And that hasn't gone away, has it?
Not at all. You can't really understand what's happening in the world today without understanding the role of energy. The conflicts, the alliances, the economies, it's all connected.
And speaking of connections, we can't forget about those giant corporations, right?
The Exxons, the Chevrons, the Shells.
Yeah, those guys. They're huge. They have so much power, economic and political.
There's no doubt about that.
It makes you wonder, are they the ones really in control of all this?
Well, the sources definitely detail how these corporations can influence things. They've got the money to lobby governments, to fund research. They control so much of the infrastructure.
But are they the bad guys in this story?
It's not that simple. They're businesses. They're driven by profit. And as the demand for clean energy grows and the costs for things like solar and wind go down, you can see them changing their strategies.
So they're adapting.
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing a lot more investment in renewables now.
So does that mean we can trust them to lead the way to a, sustainable future?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it? It's great that they're getting involved in clean energy, but the sources also remind us we can't just rely on them to put the planet first,
They still have to answer to their shareholders.
Right. It's about profit for them, ultimately. So it seems like we need a more, multi-pronged approach, right?
Yeah, regulations, new technologies, and people demanding change, it all has to work together.
Exactly. But sometimes, I admit, it feels a bit overwhelming.
Me too. Like, where do we even start?
That's a really common feeling, I think. But one thing the sources really emphasize is the power of individuals.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Like, our everyday choices. Every time we conserve energy, every time we buy from a company that's trying to be sustainable, every time we speak up about these issues.
You're saying those things actually matter?
They really do, because when millions of people make those choices, it starts to create real change.
So it's not about feeling helpless, right? It's about recognizing that we all have a part to play.
Exactly. And remember, this whole energy landscape, it's always changing. New tech is coming out all the time. Policies are being debated. People are becoming more aware.
It's like we're part of this ongoing story, right?
It is like that. And what happens next, well, it depends on all of us.
That's actually a really empowering thought.
It is. And I think as we wrap up this deep dive, the big takeaway for me is that energy is not just something we use. It's a force that shapes everything. Our lives, our societies, our planet.
Yeah, I agree.
So understanding these power struggles, these different perspectives, that's crucial if we want to make good decisions and create a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been a truly fascinating deep dive. Thanks for taking us through it.
It's been my pleasure. And thanks to you, our listener, for joining us on this exploration of energy and all the forces at play.
We've covered a lot today, from those groundbreaking inventors to the rise of fossil fuels and the search for alternatives. And hopefully we've given you some things to think about as you continue your own journey.
We hope you stay curious, keep asking questions, and maybe even consider the impact of your own energy choices.
Because ultimately, the future of energy is in all our hands. And it's a future worth fighting for. Thanks for listening.